Hey guys, welcome back to FOGMAN Stories, the place where we dive into real ghost stories that will send chills down your spine. If you love creepy haunted houses, ghostly encounters, and things that go bump in the night, you're in the right place. Tonight, we've got a story that's guaranteed to give you goosebumps. But before we jump in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a spooky tale. And hey, have you ever had a paranormal experience? Seen a ghost? Felt something you just couldn't explain? We'd love to hear about it. Send us your story, and we might share it in a future video. Alright, grab a blanket, turn off the lights, and get comfy, because this one's gonna haunt you. Story 1. Have you ever had that eerie feeling that someone is watching you? That cold shiver creeping up your spine even though the room is warm? What if that feeling wasn't just paranoia? What if something was watching you? This is a story about a night that was supposed to be legendary. A high school party meant to be remembered. And trust me, it was remembered, but for all the wrong reasons. It was almost midnight. My best friend Megan and I had just finished showering in separate bathrooms after spending the day preparing for what was supposed to be the best party of the year. My parents were away for the weekend on a trip to Hawaii, and we had the house to ourselves. We had invited nearly the entire freshman class. After all, a high school party isn't really a party without a crowd and, let's be honest, alcohol. I handed Megan the keys and asked her to grab the beer from the garage. She went out, and before I could even turn my attention back to setting up the snacks, I heard a sharp, terrified scream followed by the shattering of glass. Megan burst into the room, her face drained of color, breathing heavily. "I saw someone out there," she gasped. "A man. He was see-through, dressed in all black." I frowned. "Megan, come on. You probably just freaked yourself out. Maybe it was a shadow. Or, I know what I saw," she snapped, her hands trembling, wanting to prove her wrong. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the garage. It was silent, too silent, but there was no one there. The beer was intact, aside from the broken bottle Megan must have dropped in her panic. I shook my head, grabbed what we needed, and went back inside. As people started arriving, the music blared, and soon, the house was filled with laughter, dancing, and the chaos of a full-blown high school party. Everything seemed fine until Heather, one of our friends, came downstairs. Her face was pale as if she had just seen a ghost. "I was coming out of the bathroom," she whispered, "and I walked through someone. A man, dressed in black. He just wasn't there." My stomach turned. Megan and I exchanged glances. "It's okay," I said, trying to brush it off. "Maybe it was just a trick of the light." Heather wasn't convinced. "I'm leaving," she muttered and hurried out. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. But then I saw him. A man, dressed in black, sitting casually on the couch like he belonged there. Nobody else seemed to notice him. My heart pounded as I marched over. "Hey, get out of my house." No response. I turned to a group of guys nearby. "Guys, tell him to leave." They looked at me like I was crazy. "Who?" "Him. Right there." They laughed. "Mia, you're drunk. Just sit down and chill." I wasn't even drinking. The night continued, but Megan wasn't done seeing him. She spotted him near the kitchen, then in the hallway, then peering in from the window. Every time, he vanished the moment she tried to show someone else. I wanted to ignore it, to just have fun. But when the most popular guy in school saw him, everything changed. Panic spread. People fled. Within minutes, the once lively party had turned into a ghost town, leaving only a handful of people behind. Defeated, I told them to go home. The fun was over. As I sat alone in the now eerily silent house, I felt a chill creeping through the air. The music had stopped. The laughter was gone. But the presence, it was still there. I could feel it. I spent the rest of the night curled up in my bed, every creak in the house making my heart pound. The next morning, Megan called me. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "Barely," I admitted. I kept feeling like someone was watching me. Me too. I even saw him in my dreams. He was just standing at the foot of my bed, staring. That was when I decided to confront my parents about the house. When they returned from their trip, I casually brought it up over dinner. "Hey, has anything weird ever happened in this house?" My mom and dad exchanged a glance. "Why do you ask?" my dad said cautiously. I hesitated, then shrugged. "Just curious." Mom sighed. "Well, we never wanted to tell you this, but the people who lived here before us were murdered. That's why we got the house so cheap." The air around me felt heavier. "What do you mean, murdered?" "A family," my dad said. "Husband, wife, and their teenage son. They were found dead in the living room. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. It was like they just stopped living." Megan and I didn't sleep for a week after that. I never saw the ghost again. But the memory of that night still lingers. I moved out of that house a year later. But sometimes, I swear I still feel that same chilling presence whenever I close my eyes. This story leaves us with so many questions. Who was the man in black? Why did he appear only during the party? Was he tied to the tragic history of the house or something even darker? If you were in this situation, what would you do? Would you have ignored him? Or left the house immediately? Let us know in the comments. And if you have your own paranormal story, send it in. We might feature it in a future video. Until next time, stay safe. And don't ignore the shadows. Story 2. Today, I've got a real creepy one for you. This isn't some made-up ghost story to tell around a campfire. This actually happened. And let me tell you, if it were me in this situation, I'd have packed my bags and never looked back. So, sit tight, turn on a light if you need to, and let's dive into this eerie experience. It all started on an ordinary afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I was home alone, babysitting my little cousin, Lily, while her mom ran some errands. Now, Lily was about 6 years old at the time, a sweet kid with curly blonde hair and big, round eyes that could make anyone melt. She was sitting in the living room, watching cartoons, while I decided it was a good time to take a quick shower. Now, before we go any further, let me just say, this house? It had always given me weird vibes. Nothing I could put my finger on. Just that subtle feeling, like you're being watched even when you know you're alone. But hey, I didn't think much of it. I was just there to watch Lily for a couple of hours. Nothing more. So, I head upstairs, turn on the water, and hop in. Maybe 10 minutes go by when suddenly, bam, the bathroom door flies open. And there stands Lily, her little face pale as a ghost, tears streaming down her cheeks. She's shaking, barely able to get the words out. The walls are talking. She sobs. "Now, listen. Kids have wild imaginations. Right? At first, I think maybe she's just playing, or maybe she heard some weird noise from the pipes or something. So, I quickly grab a towel, kneel down to her level, and try to calm her down. "What do you mean, sweetie?" I ask gently. "What did the walls say?" She looks at me, eyes wide with fear, and whispers, "They called you a bitch." I freeze. Lily doesn't know that word. I know for a fact no one in our family curses around her. And yet, she says it with such certainty, like she's just repeating exactly what she heard. At this point, my heart's pounding. I know I have to do something, whether it's to ease her fear or my own. I'm not sure. So, thinking quickly, I put on my best, cool older cousin act. I march down the stairs, straight into the living room, and slap my hand against the nearest wall. "Bad wall," I scold, giving it a few playful smacks. "You don't talk like that in this house." Lily watches, still hiccuping from her crying fit, but she looks a little calmer. I turn back to her and ask, "All right, what are they saying now?" Her face goes pale again. She swallows hard and whispers, "Now they're laughing at you." Chills. Absolute chills. I don't remember much of what happened next. Just that I grabbed Lily, sat with her on the couch, and turned up the TV as loud as it would go. I wasn't about to give those walls any more chances to talk. But here's the thing. This wasn't the first weird thing to happen in that house. Looking back, I realized there had always been strange occurrences. At night, I would sometimes hear faint whispers, like someone having a conversation just out of earshot. Once, when I was home alone late at night, I swore I heard someone walking upstairs. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, moving from one end of the hallway to the other. But when I gathered the courage to check, the house was completely empty. Another time, my aunt, Lily's mom, told me about an experience she had. She was doing the dishes when she felt a breath of cold air on her neck, like someone was standing right behind her. When she turned around, of course, there was no one there, but the feeling of being watched never left her. She even started keeping a kitchen knife close by whenever she was alone in the house, just in case. Lily, too, had more stories. She told me that sometimes, at night, she would hear voices whispering in her room. She couldn't make out what they were saying, but she knew they were talking about her. And then there was her old stuffed rabbit, the one she slept with every night. On more than one occasion, she would wake up to find it sitting on the floor, across the room, even though she was sure she had gone to sleep holding it. The final straw for me happened a few weeks after the talking walls incident. I was alone in the house, waiting for my aunt to come home, when I suddenly heard my name being called. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, like someone was standing just outside my bedroom door. My stomach dropped. I knew I was alone. There was no reason for anyone to be calling me. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, but the voice came again, closer this time. I grabbed my phone, bolted out of my room, and sat on the porch until my aunt got home. That night, I told her everything. She didn't say much, but I could tell by the look on her face that she believed me. That was the last time I ever spent the night in that house. Years later, my sister, Emma, moved in. She swears she hasn't experienced anything weird, no voices, no laughter, no whispers in the night. Maybe whatever was in that house was just playing games with me and Lily. Maybe it only showed itself to certain people. Or maybe, just maybe, it's still there, waiting for the right person to hear it. But let me tell you something. I'm never stepping foot in that house again. So, what do you guys think? Have you ever experienced anything like this? Is it possible for a house to hold energy? To whisper things that aren't supposed to be heard? Or was it all just the imagination of a scared little girl, and a cousin who should have trusted his gut a little more? Whatever the case, some places just don't feel right. And sometimes, when the walls start talking, it's best not to listen. Story 3. You ever had that one moment in life where something completely bizarre happens, but no one believes you? Like, you're standing there, experiencing something so real, so chilling, and yet when you tell people, they just shrug it off? Yeah, well, that happened to me, and trust me, this is no bedtime story. This is real. My name is Mia. And when I was 9 years old, my family moved into an old house on Willow Street. It was a fresh start for us after moving from Japan to Seattle. My mom, my older siblings, Matthew and Catalina, my younger brother Kenji, and I all settled in, waiting for my dad to join us later. It was a big adjustment, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to experience. One afternoon, while Mom and my older siblings were out grocery shopping, I was left at home with Kenji and my other brother, Ryan. Kenji and I were just playing around when I suddenly felt a sharp yank on my hair. Naturally, I thought it was him messing with me, so I turned around and smacked him. That got me in trouble with Ryan. When I tried to explain what had happened, he just rolled his eyes and told me to quit making up stories. So, I let it go. But that was just the beginning. The next day, I was rummaging through my parents' room looking for some paper to draw on when I saw her. A little girl, about my age, standing in the doorway. She had brown hair tied into pigtails and wore a knee-length white dress. She didn't say anything. She just stared at me for what felt like forever before turning and walking away. At first, I thought she was the daughter of one of the guests who had visited earlier. But when I asked my mom about her, she looked at me like I was crazy. "What girl? There were no kids here today," she said. No matter how much I insisted, she wouldn't believe me. Eventually, I gave up. Then, things got even weirder. A couple of days later, while I was watching TV, Catalina walked up to me and said, "Your friend is at the door." I frowned. "What friend? I don't know anyone here." But she insisted and dragged me to the front door. When I got there, nothing. Nobody was outside. Catalina looked just as confused as I was. "She was just here," she mumbled. "A girl with brown hair in pigtails and a white dress." That's when it clicked. She had seen the same girl I did. But I wasn't scared. Not yet. If anything, I was just curious. I told myself that next time I saw her, I'd talk to her, ask her why she was following me. 3 weeks passed. Nothing happened. Then, one evening, while my brothers were digging through Matthew's closet looking for an old video game, I saw her again, sitting on my brother's bed. She didn't seem threatening. She just sat there, swinging her legs, watching me. So, I finally said it. "Hey, why do you keep following me? Do you want something?" Ryan and Kenji turned around, confused. "Who are you talking to?" I ignored them and followed the girl as she quietly walked into my room. And that's when she spoke. "I'm Emily," she said. "This used to be my home." She told me she had lived in this house with her family, her parents and her older sister. But one night, her sister did something unimaginable. Out of jealousy, she killed them all. She couldn't handle the way their parents always seemed to favor Emily. Even though they loved us both the same. She whispered. Her sister was still alive. She had been sent away. But Emily, she was stuck here. I didn't believe her at first. You're messing with me, I said. Ghosts aren't real. Emily simply smiled. I'll prove it to you. Then, she walked straight through my bedroom wall. I stood there frozen, my mouth dry, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. When she came back, I finally found my voice. Aren't ghosts supposed to be scary? Why are you so nice? She shrugged. I just want a friend. That was the start of our strange, secret friendship. Over time, she told me more about herself. We were the third family to live here since she died. She had tried making friends with the other kids who had lived here before me. But they always ran away. Their families moved out soon after. But I didn't run. I didn't move out. Emily started appearing more frequently. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see her sitting by my desk, watching me with sad eyes. Other times, I'd hear soft whispers outside my door, though no one else in the house seemed to hear them. One day, I even found my stuffed bear neatly placed at the foot of my bed, something I never did. Was that you? I asked her, and she simply nodded. As I grew older, I started to understand Emily's loneliness. She wasn't evil. She wasn't trying to scare us away. She was just there, existing in a world that had long forgotten her. She never talked about moving on or finding peace. I don't even know if she wanted to. Maybe she just wanted to be remembered. Now, I'm 13, and Emily is still here. She's still my friend. I don't talk about her to anyone, because I know they won't believe me. But every now and then, late at night, when the house is quiet, I'll hear a soft giggle, or I'll see a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror. And I know she's still with me. Some people say ghosts are nothing more than echoes of the past, lingering memories that refuse to fade. Others believe they're spirits, trapped between worlds, waiting for something, or someone, to set them free. But me? I think some ghosts just don't want to be alone. And maybe, just maybe, they don't have to be. Story 4. You ever heard of a house so haunted that the entire family refuses to sleep in their own bedrooms? Yeah, this isn't some made-up Hollywood story. This actually happened. And let me tell you, if you were there that night, you would have felt the chills crawling up your spine just like I did. It all started with a simple ghost hunt. Just another night out for the Sacramento Paranormal Society. But what we found inside that house, that was something else entirely. Buckle up, because this is the kind of story that stays with you long after the lights go out. The date was February 24th, 2007. I remember it clearly because I had just left my place, humming along to the X-Files theme song, fully prepared for a night of ghost hunting. I was meeting up with my team, the Sacramento Paranormal Society, or SPS for short. The leader of our group, Donovan Turner, had called us together for a case in North Highlands, Sacramento County. The homeowners, who had specifically asked to remain anonymous, were desperate for help. They had been experiencing unexplainable things for months, objects moving on their own, the scent of cigarette smoke when no one in the house smoked, and worst of all, their young son's blankets being yanked off him in the middle of the night. It got so bad that the whole family had taken to sleeping in the living room together, too scared to be alone in their own rooms. By 1928 hours, we arrived at the house. Just as the weather decided to make things extra spooky, ominous clouds rolled in, turning into a full-blown storm with howling winds and heavy rain. Classic horror movie setup, right? But trust me, nothing about this night felt staged. As we unpacked our gear, infrared cameras, digital recorders, EMF meters, and temperature gauges, Donovan went over the details of the case once more. The family had reported seeing shadows moving along the walls, strange noises in the kitchen, and a particularly active presence in the master bedroom. The TV had turned on and off by itself, and the freezer door had a habit of opening on its own. They even claimed that a framed picture would repeatedly get knocked off the kitchen counter as if something was trying to get their attention. The first team to enter the house was Donovan and Jason. They started in the son's bedroom, where they immediately hit a cold spot, a sudden temperature drop from warm to freezing in just a few seconds. Jason, our equipment handler, noticed that his voice recorder, equipped with a brand new battery, had drained completely within seconds. Could it have been the work of a spirit? Hard to say, but we weren't ruling anything out. Meanwhile, Janet, our intuitive, did a walkthrough. The moment she stepped into the kitchen, she said she felt drawn to the sink, almost like something was telling her to look out into the backyard. When she moved into the hallway, she suddenly felt a heavy pressure, like the air had thickened around her. By the time she reached the master bedroom, she was gasping for breath, overwhelmed by a sense of distress. She grabbed at her stomach, wincing in pain. "This house, it has more than one presence," she muttered. "I can feel them." She focused on a hairbrush and an old handheld mirror sitting on the dresser. Something about those objects felt significant. She then pointed out something strange. The master bedroom had an add-on section. And while the newer part of the room felt light, the older part felt suffocating, almost like it was holding onto something dark. In the little boy's room, Janet sensed energy, playful, mischievous, but when she stepped into the bathroom, her expression changed. "There's laughter here," she whispered, "a child's giggle, but there's something else too. Something older." At 20:45 hours, things started getting even weirder. Donovan witnessed the garage door leading into the house open and close entirely on its own. I checked for drafts, but the door was too heavy. It would have taken a solid push to move it. And yet, it had swung open as if someone had walked right through. Then it was my turn to go in with Donovan. We investigated the master bedroom, nothing at first. But when we stepped into the little boy's room, I felt it, a sharp temperature drop, from 91 degrees to 65 in seconds. I reached out, placing my hand in the cold spot, and then I saw it. A tiny orb, no bigger than a pinhead, floating in the air. It hovered for a moment, then dissipated into nothingness. My first real experience in this house. As the night went on, both Jason and Janet came to the same conclusion. There were multiple entities in the house. One of them was a little boy, no older than 7, playful but lonely. Another was a man, possibly in his 40s, carrying sadness and frustration with him. But there was something else, something neither of them could fully identify. A third presence that lurked in the shadows, never fully revealing itself. The family had confirmed that a distant relative of theirs had been shot. And Janet picked up on that immediately. She couldn't explain why, but she had a strong sense of grief. A wave of sorrow that almost brought her to tears. As we continued our investigation, our cameras started malfunctioning. Batteries drained inexplicably. The temperature gauge fluctuated wildly. And at one point, a distinct whisper was caught on the recorder. When we played it back, it was faint, but there. Help me. At around midnight, we decided to wrap things up. The family, relieved to have someone acknowledge their experiences, asked if we could stay the night. Just knowing we were there made them feel safer. But despite everything we had uncovered, I didn't feel any true malice in that home. Sadness, yes. Loneliness, definitely. But not evil. Driving home through the storm, I couldn't help but wonder about the nature of hauntings. Hollywood makes you think every ghost is out for revenge or trapped in some vengeful rage. But sometimes, maybe they just want to be seen. Maybe they're just echoes of the past, looking for someone to acknowledge them. As I pulled into my driveway, the radio crackled, and wouldn't you know it, Werewolves of London by Warren Zevon started playing. A fitting end to a night of ghost hunting, don't you think? Story 5. You ever hear a story that makes the hair on your neck stand up? One of those that stick with you, creeping up in your thoughts late at night when the house is too quiet? Well, buckle up, because this one is a real spine tingler. This is a story about a road trip gone horribly wrong, about loss, and about something unexplainable. Something that makes you wonder just how thin the veil between the living and the dead really is. A few years back, a guy named Lucas and his girlfriend, Samantha, were on a road trip with their best friends, Daniel and Rachel. They were making their way from California to Wisconsin, cruising through the long stretches of highway in a small, old Honda hatchback. The car was packed with snacks, a couple of suitcases, and the kind of excitement that only a cross-country road trip can bring. Lucas sat in the back with Samantha, dozing off while Daniel drove. They had been driving all night, and the hum of the tires against the road was like a lullaby. Samantha leaned against his shoulder, half asleep herself, while Rachel was up front, keeping Daniel company as he focused on the road ahead. Then, darkness. The next thing Lucas remembered was waking up in a stark white hospital room. His head ached like hell, and the bright fluorescent lights above him made his vision blur for a moment. As his eyes adjusted, he saw Daniel and Rachel standing by his bedside, looking down at him with relieved smiles. "Man, you really scared us," Daniel said, shaking his head. "You're lucky." Samantha, standing beside him, squeezed his hand gently. "I'll be waiting for you when you get out," she said softly. Before he could say anything else, there was a knock at the door. It was a gentle tap, but somehow it filled the room with an eerie stillness. Lucas turned his head toward the sound, but when he looked back at his friends, they were gone. Not just gone, but vanished, as if they had never been there. The only thing left was the faint swaying of the white curtain near the hospital window. Then, his parents walked in, followed closely by his aunt and uncle. Their faces were full of relief, but also something else, something that made his stomach twist. "Thank God you're awake," his mother cried, rushing to his bedside. She grabbed his hand, her fingers trembling. "We thought we lost you." Lucas blinked, confused. "What?" "I just saw Daniel and Rachel. They were just here." Silence filled the room like a thick fog. His mother's face crumpled as fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. His father looked away, jaw tight. His cousin, who had come along with the family, hesitated before finally speaking. "Lucas, Daniel and Rachel didn't make it. You were the only survivor." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. "That's not possible," he whispered. "They were just here." They walked through the window. His cousin swallowed hard. Lucas, we're on the 4th floor. There's no way they walked anywhere. A heavy silence settled in the room. No one spoke. No one moved. Lucas felt the air around him grow colder as realization sank in. The doctor later suggested it might have been the head injury, hallucinations, dreams bleeding into reality. But Lucas knew what he saw. He knew their touch had been real. Their voices clear. They had come to say goodbye. As the days passed, Lucas found himself replaying the accident in his mind, desperate to piece together what had happened. His memories were fragmented, but flashes of it would return at odd moments. The shriek of tires on wet pavement. The blinding flash of headlights. The gut-wrenching feeling of the car flipping through the air. One night, unable to sleep, Lucas pulled out the clothes he had been wearing that night. The hospital had returned his belongings in a sealed plastic bag. His jeans were torn, stained with dried blood. His hoodie had a deep gash across the front. But what made his breath catch in his throat was his phone. It was completely shattered, but when he powered it on, the screen flickered for a moment before displaying the last photo taken, a selfie of the 4 of them, smiling, taken just hours before the crash. His fingers trembled as he scrolled through the last few messages. There was one from Rachel, sent just minutes before the accident. "Guys, I swear I just saw someone on the road, dressed all in white, but there was no car. Nothing. Just standing there. Gave me chills." Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't seen anyone. He hadn't heard Rachel say anything about it. But a feeling of unease settled deep in his gut. Had they seen something they weren't supposed to? The next week, Lucas was discharged. His parents drove him back home. But something inside him felt off. His house didn't feel like home anymore. The air felt heavy. The corners too dark. Every time he glanced in the mirror, he half expected to see someone standing behind him. The real horror came that night. Lying in bed, sleep eluded him. Shadows stretched long across the room, and the silence was too thick. Then, just as his eyes started to close, he heard it, a soft knock at the window. His breath hitched. Slowly, he turned his head. His room was on the 2nd floor. Another knock. This time, more insistent. His chest tightened as he forced himself to look. Outside, barely visible against the darkness, stood Daniel and Rachel. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, but they were smiling. Lucas scrambled backward, his heartbeat roaring in his ears. He blinked, and they were gone. The next morning, he found something on the ground beneath his window. A single photograph. It was the same selfie from his phone. But this time, standing behind them in the background, was a shadowy figure dressed all in white. So, what do you think? Was it just a trick of the mind? Or was it something more? I'll leave that for you to decide. But one thing's for sure, sometimes, the ones we lose aren't really gone. They just find another way to say farewell. Story 6. Ever heard of sleep paralysis? You know, that terrifying moment when you're awake but can't move a muscle? Some say it's just your brain playing tricks on you. But others, especially those who've experienced it, believe there's something more sinister at play. They call it the devil riding your back. And trust me, if you've ever been through it, you'd know why. Let me tell you about something that happened to me when I was 12, something I'll never forget. I was just a regular kid, living in a quiet little town where nothing much ever happened. My parents were strict but loving. And our house was nothing special. Just a cozy little place with 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, and a big old oak tree in front. Nothing about it screamed haunted or creepy. At least not until that one night. It was summer, and I remember the air being thick and humid. The kind that makes your sheets stick to your skin. That night, I went to bed like usual, leaving my window open to let the night breeze in. The moon was full, shining bright through my window, casting long, eerie shadows across my room. Everything was normal, until I woke up. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I opened my eyes and realized I couldn't move. My arms, my legs, everything was frozen. It felt like something heavy was sitting on my chest, pressing me down into the mattress. My heart pounded in my ears. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Panic took over. My eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, that could explain what was happening. But there was nothing. No shadowy figure, no glowing eyes. Just the pale light of the moon seeping through my window. I struggled, fighting to break free. But it was useless. That invisible force held me down like a weight I couldn't shake. Then, in my mind, I heard my great-grandfather's voice. He was a monk, wise and deeply spiritual. I remembered the chants he used to recite, the prayers in Cambodian that he had taught my mother. Desperate, I started repeating them in my head, over and over. I don't know if it was my fear, my belief, or something else entirely, but suddenly, the weight lifted. Just like that. One moment, I was trapped, and the next, I could breathe again. Gasping, I shot up in bed, my body drenched in sweat. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the lamp on my nightstand. The second the room filled with light, I checked the clock. 3:48 a.m. I had been stuck like that for almost 10 minutes. The next morning, I ran straight to my parents, telling them everything, but they didn't believe me. They brushed it off, saying it was just a nightmare. Sleep paralysis. My dad called it. It happens to people sometimes. But it wasn't just sometimes. At least, not in my house. Months went by, and nothing else happened. I tried to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, it really was just a dream. But then, something changed. One afternoon, my mom decided to take a nap in my room. I wasn't home at the time. But when I got back, she was acting off. She was quiet, pale, her usual warmth replaced with something I couldn't quite explain. I asked her what was wrong, but she just shook her head and muttered, "Nothing." Later that night, I overheard her whispering to my dad in the kitchen. She sounded scared, and then I caught the words that made my blood run cold. It happened to me. She wouldn't talk about it, wouldn't tell me what she saw or felt. But I didn't need to hear it. I already knew. Something was in that room. Something that wasn't just a trick of the mind. And even though we moved out years later, I still wonder, was it really just sleep paralysis? Or was it something far, far worse? After we moved out, I thought I was finally free from whatever had haunted me in that room. But even now, years later, I still wake up in the middle of the night, feeling that same eerie presence hovering just outside my vision. Sometimes, I swear I can hear whispers when I'm alone, or feel the faintest touch pressing down on my chest, just for a moment, like a reminder that it never really left me. There were nights when I was living in a completely different house, miles away, and yet, the feeling would return. I would wake up, unable to move, my breath caught in my throat, The pressure on my chest would build again. A sensation so familiar it made my skin crawl. I could feel something in the room with me. But I never dared to look. What if this time I did see something? One night, a few years after we moved, I stayed at my cousin's house. They had no idea about what had happened to me as a kid. And I never felt the need to tell them. But that night, as I was sleeping in their guest room, the same thing happened. It was like something had followed me. The heavy weight on my chest, the inability to move, the creeping sense that something was just beyond my line of sight. It was back. I tried to fight it, but it was just as strong as before. I felt a presence, unseen but suffocating. Desperation overtook me, and again, I repeated the chants my great-grandfather had taught me. The second I finished, the weight lifted. I gasped for air, my body finally my own again. I turned on every single light in the room. The clock on the wall read 3:42 a.m., almost the exact same time as before. That night, I didn't sleep, and when morning came, I told my cousin what had happened. They looked at me strangely, but instead of laughing it off, they said something that sent a chill down my spine. That's weird. A couple of months ago, my brother woke up screaming in that room. He said he felt something sitting on his chest, like a shadow he couldn't see. I didn't know what to say. I had spent years convincing myself that it was just in my head. That maybe it was just sleep paralysis like my dad had said. But if that were true, why did it follow me? Why did my cousin's brother experience the same thing? Now, as an adult, I still think about it. Every now and then, in the quiet hours of the night, I wonder if it will come back. If I will wake up again to find myself frozen, trapped under the weight of something unseen. And I wonder, what would happen if one night I finally did see it? Some people say it's just science, your brain waking up before your body. But others, they say it's the devil riding your back. And if you've ever felt it, even once, you'd understand why. Story 7. Alright, gather around folks, because I've got a story that will make you think twice about every ticket you've ever received. Ever been pulled over by a cop, only to find out later that he had no business being there, because he had been dead for years? Sounds like something out of a horror movie, right? Well, buckle up, because this one's real. It was a Friday night. The kind where the air is buzzing with energy. And the weekend promises nothing but trouble and fun. I had just gotten off work, exhausted but ready to let loose. My brother, Jason, swung by to pick me up. And we had plans, big ones. A couple of our friends were already waiting for us at a club downtown. And we were hyped to get there. To set the mood, Jason cranked up the volume in his car, letting the bass shake the seats as we belted out lyrics. Completely off-key but not caring one bit. The city lights blurred as we sped down the road, our laughter mixing with the booming music. That's when it happened, the flickering of red and blue lights in the distance. At first, I thought it was just another patrol car cruising by. But then the sirens blared, sharp and commanding. Jason saw them too, and instead of slowing down, he did what any adrenaline-fueled 20-something might do. He hit the gas. "Dude, what are you doing?" I shouted, gripping the edge of my seat. "Relax, I just need to make a quick turn," Jason muttered, his hands tightening on the wheel. But the cop was fast. Too fast. Within seconds, he was right behind us, forcing Jason to pull over. The officer stepped out of the squad car, his figure silhouetted against the flashing lights. He moved with purpose, his boots crunching against the pavement as he approached our car. I was too preoccupied with the thought of our parents finding out to pay much attention to his face. Jason, on the other hand, was furious. Loud music? Seriously? That's why you're pulling us over? He muttered under his breath. The officer, unfazed, leaned in, shining a flashlight at us. License and registration. Now. Jason handed it over reluctantly while I sat frozen, waiting for the inevitable ticket. The officer scribbled something down on his notepad, tore off the ticket, and handed it to Jason. Turn the music down next time. That was it. No long lecture, no scolding, just a ticket and a warning. Jason muttered something under his breath as the cop walked back to his car. As soon as he drove off, Jason crumpled the ticket in his fist. Great. Just great. Mom and Dad are gonna kill me. We went home that night instead of heading to the club, neither of us wanting to risk another run-in with the cops. Over the next few days, Jason grumbled about the fine, while I silently planned how I'd help pay it off. So when Friday rolled around and I got my paycheck, we headed straight to the courthouse to settle it. The courthouse lobby was quiet, with the faint hum of office equipment and murmured conversations filling the air. We walked up to the front desk where a woman in her 50s sat, typing away on her computer. Jason handed her the ticket, and I pulled out the cash. She barely glanced at it before laughing. "Oh, honey, you don't have to pay this." Jason and I exchanged confused looks. "What do you mean? It's a real ticket, isn't it?" She shook her head, still chuckling. "It is. But the officer who wrote this, he's been dead for over a decade." Silence. The words hit like a slap of cold air. I felt a shiver creep up my spine as Jason snatched the ticket back, scanning it like he expected the ink to disappear. "That's not funny," he said, his voice a mix of disbelief and irritation. "Oh, I'm not joking," she replied, still smiling, but there was something knowing in her expression. "Lilydale Drive, right? That's where he pulled you over?" Jason nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's where it always happens. Every few months, someone comes in with a ticket just like yours. And every time, it's signed by Officer Reynolds. And Officer Reynolds has been dead since 2005. We stood there, stunned into silence. The woman went on, explaining that he had died in a car accident while on duty, ironically. While pulling someone over, people still reported seeing his patrol car on Lilydale Drive. Still felt their hearts drop when they saw his lights flashing in their rearview mirror. But he wasn't there, not really. As we left the courthouse, Jason was unusually quiet, gripping the ticket like it might reveal some hidden truth. We drove back in silence, neither of us quite ready to acknowledge the creeping unease that settled between us. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the moment, Officer Reynolds. His presence, the way the lights had chased us down so fast. Had we really seen a ghost? Or was there some logical explanation we were missing? A few days later, curiosity got the best of me. I started digging, searching for anything about Officer Reynolds. It didn't take long to find his obituary. Everything the woman at the courthouse had said was true. He had died on duty, on that very road, in pursuit of a speeding car. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at his photo. I recognized that face. I had seen it, lit up by the red and blue lights just days ago. I told Jason, expecting him to laugh it off. But he didn't. Instead, he nodded. I kept thinking about it too. He admitted, something was off. He didn't move like a normal cop. We never drove down Lilydale Drive at night again. Maybe it was just our nerves. Maybe it was just an eerie coincidence. Or maybe, just maybe, Officer Reynolds was still out there, patrolling the road he never left, making sure no one got away. So, what do you think? A simple glitch in the system? A prank played by courthouse employees? Or was Officer Reynolds really still out there, making sure the law was upheld, even in death? I'll let you decide. Just, if you ever find yourself on Lilydale Drive, and you see those flashing red and blue lights behind you, maybe, just maybe, don't hit the gas. Story 8. Have you ever had that eerie feeling that you're not alone, even when no one else is around? That unsettling sensation of being watched. The way the hairs on your arms suddenly stand up. Or the fleeting glimpse of something, or someone, just at the edge of your vision. Some people shrug it off as paranoia. Others, like Michael, learn the hard way that sometimes you're not imagining things at all. Michael had always been a practical man. He wasn't the type to believe in ghost stories or let fear get the best of him. But when he moved back into his childhood home, a house that had been in his family for generations, he began to question everything he thought he knew about the world. The house held memories, both good and painful. His grandfather, Joseph, had lived there until he passed away in the very bedroom Michael now slept in. Years earlier, his beloved dog, Max, had died tragically after being hit by a car right outside the property. But despite these losses, Michael had never felt uneasy in the home, until now. It started with small, almost dismissible occurrences. One night, Michael was deep in sleep when he suddenly felt a sharp tap on his shoulder. It wasn't the brush of a blanket or the vague sensation of a dream, it was distinct. Deliberate, he bolted upright, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. And there, at the foot of his bed, stood a man. He was tall, dressed in faded jeans and a blue sweater. His face was shadowed by the dim light, but something about his stance was familiar. Michael blinked, once, twice, and in that split second, the figure was gone. For a long time, he sat frozen in place, his breath shallow. He told himself it had been a dream, a trick of the mind. But deep down, something told him otherwise. Then came the sounds. Footsteps upstairs when he was home alone. The creak of the floorboards in the hallway outside his bedroom at night. The muffled rustling, as if someone were moving about just beyond his field of vision. One evening, as Michael stood outside calling for his dog, Bailey, he noticed movement near the trees. A dark shape, low to the ground, lurked just beyond the yard. Thinking it was Bailey, he stepped forward. "Come on, girl," he called out. The shape didn't move, it lingered, motionless. Michael hesitated. There was something unnatural about the way it stood there, watching him. Then, in an instant, it was gone, not in a way that a living thing would disappear into the brush, but as if it had simply ceased to exist. Shaken, he ran back inside, and there, waiting patiently by the door, was Bailey, her tail wagging. She had been inside the whole time. After that, the events escalated. Cold spots in the middle of summer. Objects moving from their usual places. The feeling of something brushing against his leg as he sat watching TV. Though nothing was there, one evening, he swore he heard a voice, faint but unmistakable, whispering his name. Then came the sighting that changed everything. It was a bright afternoon when Michael, lost in the comfort of his couch, caught movement outside his window. A man was walking across the yard. Tall, familiar. His heart pounded. He jumped up and ran outside, shouting after the figure. "Hey!" The man turned the corner. Disappearing from view, Michael sprinted after him, his pulse hammering in his ears. But as he rounded the house, there was nothing, no one, just an empty street, silent and still under the golden light of day. Michael stood there, his breath coming in short gasps, his skin crawling, because deep down, he knew, the man he had seen wasn't just anyone. It was his grandfather, and he wasn't alone. As days passed, the house seemed to come alive with an energy Michael couldn't explain. Items would go missing, only to reappear in the strangest of places. The old radio in the corner would turn on by itself, playing his grandfather's favorite song in the middle of the night. One night, as he lay in bed, he heard scratching at the bedroom door. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like claws against wood. His first thought was Bailey. But when he opened the door, she was sound asleep downstairs. Then the shadows began to take shape. Michael would see them move along the walls, dark figures that had no source. They would flicker in the periphery of his vision, darting away whenever he turned to face them. And then, one evening, something happened that sent chills down his spine. He was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when he caught sight of a reflection in the window. Standing behind him, just over his shoulder, was the same tall man in the blue sweater. But this time, Michael didn't blink. He turned, heart pounding, and nothing was there. Yet the feeling remained, a presence, thick in the air, a sensation that told him he was being watched. So what do you think? Can a house hold onto its past? Do the ones we love really stay with us, even after they're gone? Or is there something darker lurking in the spaces between the seen and unseen? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is for sure. Michael will never look at his childhood home the same way again. And maybe, neither will you. Story 9. Hey folks, let me tell you a story that still gives me chills to this day. I don't know what it was. I don't know why it happened. But I do know one thing. It was real. This isn't one of those made-up ghost stories you tell around a campfire. This happened, and after you hear it, you might think twice about stepping outside at night when you're all alone. It all started one evening when I was home alone with my older sister, Lacey. Our parents had gone into town for dinner, leaving us to our own devices. It was just another quiet night in Willow Creek, a small rural town where the nearest neighbor was half a mile away. We had the TV on, some show neither of us were really paying attention to, when Lacey decided she was hungry and went into the kitchen. That's when it started. I was sitting alone on the couch when suddenly, the lights flickered. At first, I thought it was just an electrical issue. Maybe the wind outside messing with the power lines. But then, Lacey came running out of the kitchen, her face white as a sheet. "There's someone outside," she yelled, breathless and panicked. I turned toward the window, my heart thudding in my chest. I couldn't see anything, just the dark outline of the trees swaying under the dim porch light. I tried to calm her down, but her fear was contagious. It wasn't the first time someone had claimed to see something, or someone, out there. A few months before that, on my birthday, I had my friends over for a sleepover. We stayed up late, talking and laughing, until exhaustion finally got the best of us. I was fast asleep when sudden screams jolted me awake. "Shut up. My parents are asleep," I hissed, groggy and annoyed. "There's someone outside," my friend Brooke whispered, her voice shaking. The other girls huddled together, their faces pale and frightened. I rubbed my eyes and got up to check, pressing my face against the cold glass of my bedroom window. The backyard stretched into darkness, the trees looming like silent sentinels. I saw nothing, heard nothing but the distant croaking of frogs and the occasional rustling of the wind. It was 2 a.m. Who would be walking around in the middle of nowhere at this hour? "Forget about it," I said, forcing a laugh. "Probably just your imagination." They didn't look convinced. But eventually, we all went back to sleep. I never told my mom about it. I figured there was no point. What was there to tell? Really? But then, a few months later, something happened that made me wish I had spoken up. It was another cold, rainy night. Around 2 a.m., my mom woke up and went to let our dog out of the bathroom where we kept him during storms. As she stepped into the hallway, she glanced out the front window and froze. A man was walking through our yard. Not just any man. He was pale, deathly pale, almost glowing in the dim light of the moon. He moved slowly, his posture stiff, his face obscured by the shadows of the trees. Mom stood there, unable to move, her breath catching in her throat. She knew, just like I did, that no one should be out there. We lived in the middle of nowhere. There were no neighbors close enough to be passing through. No late-night walkers braving the cold and the rain. She didn't say anything, just quietly closed the curtains and locked every door in the house. After that night, strange things started happening around our home. Some nights, I would wake up to the sound of slow footsteps outside my window. I never had the courage to look. I would just pull the blanket over my head and pray that whatever was out there would go away. Lacey started having nightmares, dreams about a pale man standing at the foot of her bed, staring at her with hollow, glowing eyes. She would wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, swearing that she could still feel his presence in the room. One evening, as we were eating dinner, the dog suddenly went wild, barking and growling at something outside. My dad grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch, scanning the darkness. We all watched from the doorway, holding our breath. After a moment, he sighed and muttered, "Nothing there. Must have been a deer." But as he turned to come back inside, the porch light flickered, and in that brief second of darkness, we all saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of our property, motionless, watching. I don't think I've ever seen my dad move that fast. He slammed the door shut, locked it, and ordered all of us to stay inside. That was the night he decided to put up extra locks on every window and door. Days passed, and the presence outside our home never fully went away. Sometimes, we would hear faint tapping on the windows at night, but when we looked, there was nothing there. Other times, the motion sensor lights in the backyard would flicker on, but no one was outside. It was as if someone, was testing us, waiting for the right moment. It's been years since we lived in that house, but I still think about it. About the man, or whatever he was. Some say it was just a drifter, lost in the woods. Others believe it was something much worse. A spirit, forever wandering, drawn to our home for reasons we may never understand. But one thing is certain, I never go outside alone at night anymore. And if you ever find yourself in a quiet town, surrounded by nothing but endless trees and darkness, listen closely, because you never know who, or what, might be watching you from the shadows. Story 10. You ever have that feeling when something just ain't right? You try to brush it off. Tell yourself it's just your imagination. But deep down, you know something's off? Well, tonight, I'm bringing you a story that might just make you question those little things you ignore. A story about a woman, her husband, and an apartment that seemed to have a mind of its own. So, turn down the lights, sit back, and let's dive into this eerie tale. I always had this weird feeling about the apartment my husband, Jake, and I lived in. It wasn't like the place was old or run down, just your standard modern city apartment. But something about it always gave me the creeps. Maybe it was the way the shadows moved in the hallway when no one was there. Or the random sounds I would hear in the kitchen when I was alone. Jake, of course, thought I was just being paranoid. It's probably just the pipes, he'd say, or maybe the neighbors upstairs. But I knew better. At first, I tried to ignore it. The sounds, soft footsteps, the rustling of paper, the occasional creak of the front door, were subtle enough that I could pretend they weren't real. But the more I ignored them, the more frequent they became. Doors would open and close on their own. Faint whispers would echo in the dead of night. And sometimes, I would wake up to the feeling of someone watching me. Then came the night that changed everything. Jake and I had planned a night out. He left a little earlier than me to run some errands. And I stayed behind to get ready. As I was finishing up my makeup in front of the mirror, I heard it, the sound of the front door opening, then closing. "Hey, honey, I'm almost ready," I called out, expecting Jake to answer. Silence. Then, from the kitchen, I heard the distinct sound of aluminum foil being unwrapped. A second later, the microwave beeped as if someone was heating up leftovers. I smiled to myself, thinking Jake must have been hungry after running around all evening. But when I walked downstairs, the kitchen was empty. No Jake, no food, no sign that anyone had even been there. A chill ran down my spine. My eyes darted toward the door. It was locked, just as I had left it. Slowly, I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. Then, just as I reached for my phone to call Jake, a shadow moved in the corner of my vision. I froze. It was faint, just at the edge of the hallway, barely distinguishable from the dim lighting. My pulse pounded in my ears as I forced myself to turn my head. Nothing, but the air around me felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't explain. Then, I heard it, a whisper. Low, hushed, almost like a breath against my ear. Not alone. I spun around, my back slamming against the counter. My fingers fumbled with my phone. But before I could dial, the lights flickered. The room was plunged into darkness for just a moment before the glow returned. But in that instant, I swore I saw something standing near the kitchen entrance. And then, I felt it, a cold, weightless touch on my shoulder. My breath hitched. I whipped around, but the room was empty. The air was so thick I could barely breathe. I needed to get out. Now, I ran for the front door, yanking at the knob, but it wouldn't budge. My hands trembled as I twisted it violently, my heartbeat roaring in my ears. Then, a familiar voice, Jake's voice, called out from behind me. "Babe, what's wrong?" I spun around so fast I nearly tripped. Jake stood there, his expression confused, holding a takeout bag in one hand, car keys in the other. The apartment was bright and normal again. No flickering lights, No shadows lurking in the hallway. I thought you were already home. I stammered, my voice shaking. I heard you in the kitchen. I saw. I felt. Jake frowned. I just walked in. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I swallowed hard, glancing back toward the kitchen. It looked perfectly ordinary now. But I knew what I had experienced. I knew something had been there. Jake set the takeout on the counter and walked toward me. Babe, you're shaking. Come sit down. I let him lead me to the couch. But my mind was racing. Had I imagined the whole thing? Had my paranoia finally gotten the best of me? Or had something in this apartment been waiting for me to be alone? As Jake turned on the TV, laughing at something on the screen, I forced myself to calm down. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I had overreacted. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the last time it would happen. And next time, I might not be so lucky. Sometimes, the things we brush off as paranoia aren't just tricks of the mind. Maybe there really are things lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to let us know they're there. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? If so, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another chilling tale. Until next time, sleep tight, and maybe leave a light on tonight, just in case.